If you've been living under a rock, then Joe Biden is your man.
You know what I was most proud of? For 8 years, there wasn't one single hint of a scandal or a lie.
In fact, here's a couple of guys that climbed out from under their rocks to attend Biden's smattering of support in Iowa.
He will be here in about an hour. And so far, there's no line. People are walking in the door freely.
What do you say to Joe Biden? Well, I heard Biden, who's a loser. I mean, look, Joe never got more than 1%.
When Biden isn't hawking his economic vision for America like a used car salesman,
The only people who deserve to benefit when a corporation does well are the stockholders. They're the only people that have an interest, the only job creators. Well, the folks who are out there in the middle of a storm putting up that generator when it comes down or when the river floods and going in and making sure people are safe, they're creating jobs too.
Sleepy Joe Biden's campaign is a full-blown Trump derangement syndrome troll fest.
Vice President Joe Biden is going to deliver a speech that goes right after President Trump. Biden plans to call the president an existential threat to America. The former vice president seeming to try to egg on the president, who you can bet will respond.
I believe that the president is literally an existential threat to America.
I think Joe Biden has a lot of questions he needs to answer himself. The idea that he would say that the president poses any type of threat is truly laughable, considering he was part of the administration that allowed Russia to interfere in our election. He was part of the administration that allowed Iran to continue to flourish. They gave $1.8 billion to help fund Iran and their continued bad behavior. They allowed China to continue to grow, North Korea. If anything, I think he's got a lot of explaining to do.
At the heart of his rhetoric, the long-standing hoax that Trump was referring to white supremacists when he spoke of fine people on both sides.
I never thought I'd see a day when a president of the United States would act the way he did relative to those folks who came out of the fields of back in Charlottesville carrying torches, Nazi flags, with contorted faces, chanting the same anti-Semitic bile. They asked him, they said, "What do you think?" And he said, quote, there were very fine people in both groups.
Can we finally lay this lie to rest?
Excuse me. I've condemned neo-Nazis. I've condemned many different groups, but not all of those people were neo-Nazis. Believe me, not all of those people were white supremacists by any stretch. Those people were also there because they wanted to protest the taking down of a statue, Robert E. Lee.
Speaking of half of the story, Biden calls out the Trump administration for overseeing the ripping of families apart that have illegally crossed the border.
Look, and when we see at the border his policies of ripping kids from their mothers and fathers and putting them literally in the equivalent of cages, thousands of them. What does that say? What does that say to the world?
Yet doesn't mention that a growing percentage of those families are fraudulent. As Biden appeals to bleeding hearts using a deceptive master narrative honed by the Mockingbird media, children are being trafficked as a one-way ticket to enter the United States, while undocumented women on both sides of the border are endlessly raped as the Democrats turn a blind eye. Biden appears to be reverberating from the echo chamber of the loathsome Democratic broken record, mimicking embarrassments like Ohio Representative Ms. Fudge, for example.
Obama was scandal-free. It is glaringly apparent that many who support the present administration are either racist, steeped in religious beliefs, ignorant, or, as my mother used to say, just plain dumb.
And then there are those Democrats who are going to feel right at home with the hypocrisy of creepy Joe Biden.
It is tiring to hear from so many sex-starved males on this floor talk about a woman's right to choose.
And as we go forward, Obama still won't throw his full support behind Creepy Joe, but in true troll fashion, Biden made the press abundantly aware that he attended Sasha Obama's graduation, doing whatever it takes to attach the long-dead Obama vibe close to his zombie walk of a campaign. John Bowne reporting. Rallies celebrating Trump derangement syndrome were held nationwide as those calling for impeachment took to the streets to embrace the lies being fed to them by their congressmen and the blatant bias of the mainstream media.
Here in LA and across the country, activists, they're urging House Democrats to start impeachment proceedings, and they took their messages to the streets where Trump supporters, they were waiting for them.
We love our president. We think he's doing one heck of a great job.
It's no longer a question whether or not our president is a criminal. We know that he is a criminal.
George Soros-funded MoveOn.org was in full display nationwide.
The groups behind the protests are called Move On and By the People. They organize support from dozens of smaller groups across the country, including Black Lives Matter here in New York.
MoveOn.org, which is simply a Democratic political action committee, as all of their donations go directly to Democrats, continues to masquerade as American activism. George Soros has dropped millions on MoveOn.org, while donors like Daniel Tierney, representing Wicklow Capital, donated $666,666 in an apparent representation of satanic numerology, flying in the face of American providence and foundational morality. While Dustin Moskovich of the project organizing tool Asana, representing the totalitarian Silicon Valley Goliath, dropped $3 million on MoveOn.org in 2018. Asana describes itself as a team that comes from many of the world's leading tech companies, including Google, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Salesforce, and Dropbox. Silicon Valley owns the Democrats. Earlier this week, Democrats in the U.S. Congress, rather than address the carnage and impending disease entering the country via the U.S. border, or the totalitarian attack on free speech by Silicon Valley, or even the homeless epidemic in their own districts, decided to continue their mob mental illness by pushing for impeachment.
He's unfit to be the president. He has no moral compass.
Regardless that the numerous investigations which found nothing regarding President Trump and collusion with the Russians are essentially over. Viewer discretion advised. Anyone affected by watching mental patients wielding federal power should leave the room.
Volume 1 of the report outlines a sweeping and systemic effort by Russia to interfere in the 2016 election for the benefit of Donald Trump. It establishes that the Trump campaign welcomed the Russian interference because it expected to benefit electorally from information stolen and released through the Russian effort. It shows how the Trump campaign built the theft and dumping of Russian stolen documents into its campaign messaging and strategy. And as special counsel made clear, it sets out in great detail why the conduct in his report should concern every American.
Finally, the amendment finds that the president's assertions does not change the fact that the Attorney General and the Secretary of Commerce are sadly in contempt.
Oh, how the tables have turned.
In 2017, former CIA Director Brennan stated in an open hearing in this committee that Russian active measures to impact U.S. had been going on for decades. In 2012, then candidate for president Romney stated he believed Russia posed the greatest threat to the United States, to which President Obama replied, "The 80s called, they want their foreign policy back." In 2014, then Chairman, now Ranking Member Nunes warned of Russian malign influence campaigns. All of this acknowledgement of Russia and their intentions, and yet no response from the Obama administration. So there's a lot of conspiracy theories swirling around about Russia collusion. So let's just add this one. Is it possible that a group of politically motivated individuals at the highest echelons of national security decided to turn a blind eye to this activity, feeling that it would in fact enhance their candidates' chances of winning?
The Democrats assembled us today to analyze the shoddy political hit piece known as the Mueller report. It's written in the same spirit and with the same purpose as the Steele dossier, which was once championed by Democrats on this committee. but which they rarely mentioned after it was exposed as yet another Democrat-created hoax.
Time is running out for the Democrats to present a cogent platform, minus the pitchfork mob mentality, to move the country forward. As the first Democratic debates on June 26th and 27th draw nearer, they will have to answer real questions about national security, the economy, and free speech violations that many Americans want answers to. It's likely we won't hear the answers we deserve. John Bowne reporting. The emancipation of the hardcore lifestyles of sexual deviants has become a political priority in America, as the fight for LGBTQ rights has pushed the envelope beyond what was acceptable when it comes to the rights of America's children.
There is still work to be done with regard to gay rights. There is still work to be done when you consider that LGBTQ people in this country are still not guaranteed permanent federal protection against discrimination.
What would this Equality Act do, and why is it one of the top priorities for House Democrats?
Thanks. So this is a big bill for House Democrats because it would extend protections for those who identify as LGBTQ. So it would make sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity as protected classes free from discrimination.
Protecting transgender service members is a matter of patriotism, and it transcends politics. The president's ban, as I said, is cruel and arbitrary, a decision designed to humiliate the transgender Americans who are risking and giving their lives for the United States of America.
Also unjust is felon disenfranchisement. We believe that Americans are fed up with the racist laws that keep other Americans from voting. For example, as Hillary noted last November, Florida voters, by a very large margin, restored the right to vote to over 1 million individuals with felony convictions in their past who have finished serving their sentences. The Task Force Action Fund was on the ground organizing, and we want to see that change nationwide.
And now, as you may have noticed, these lifestyles have gradually invaded our children's lives, as children have become the final frontier for a sex and trafficking industry that has been operating in record numbers under the grimy surface of civilization at an exponential pace. The Overton window is entering horrifying territory. An entirely new phase of pedophiles have carved out a social media space where they are fighting for acceptance by pushing the idea that their criminal behavior is merely a sexual orientation. Pride Month began with Snapchat recently adding a Pride Month-themed filter promoting pedophilia, and then it was removed without explanation. But then
Snapchat did a great thing and recognized people's concerns about the Love Has No Age filter, and they removed it. And now they did something even better. They brought back the same filter. They removed it to shut people up, and now it's back.
Meanwhile, it's being thrown in our child's faces, whether it's the drag queen story hour straight out of Bizarro World.
For Jonathan, though, the protests are exactly the point, making sure the next generation is taught tolerance.
When they grow up and they see someone different down the street, they won't treat them any differently because of how they look or act.
A trend that is gradually growing in libraries across the United States. In Iowa, for instance, it has mutated into children acting as strip club patrons as their oblivious, politically correct parents look on as if this is some kind of modern school activity. Or online games like Fortnite, Roblox, and Minecraft that allow children to chat with anonymous users. More than 500,000 predators are online every day. FBI statistics show that more than 50% of victims of online sexual exploitation are 12 to 15 years old. 89% of all sexual advances toward our children take place in internet chat rooms and through instant messaging. In 27% of exploitation incidents, predators asked kids for sexual photographs of themselves. while magazines like Teen Vogue offer teenage girls articles legitimizing the sex trade industry and informing teenage girls on getting an abortion without their parents' knowledge. Time is running out as parental consent becomes a thing of the past. The American Psychiatric Association is on the verge of designating pedophilia a sexual orientation in its Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, and California laws are setting the stage to protect that orientation. We can no longer assume that morality is a common thread in our society. In fact, morality is hanging on by a thread, and the looser that thread becomes, the more civilization unravels. John Bowne reporting. As the number of Ebola cases surpasses 2,000 in the Congo, where it originates from, those fighting the horrific viral hemorrhagic fever are under attack, as Reuters reported. The deputy mayor of Banai in the Eastern Democratic of Congo said 13 civilians were killed in an attack by the Allied Democratic Forces, the ADF, a group thought to be linked to the Islamic State. Back in 2014, the Sierra Leone outbreak resulted in over 28,000 infections and roughly 11,000 dead. It's no wonder that we are seeing immigrants from the Congo crossing the U.S.'s southwestern border. Recently, U.S. Border Patrol reported they had apprehended 15 immigrants from Congo. We Build the Wall crowdsourcing founder Brian Kolfage posted on his Facebook page claiming an as-yet unconfirmed DHS insider exposed to him U.S. Congo migrants have made it to the USA with confirmed cases of Ebola. 3 are in custody in Laredo, Texas, and 6 in Laredo, Mexico, and in Juarez, right next to their wall. But even if Kolfage's information is flawed, what's to stop Ebola from spreading amongst refugees south of the border? And then what? Over 1 million immigrants will cross the border in 2019 alone, and they are being flown and bussed all over the United States on the taxpayer's dime. Ebola can take up to 21 days to manifest. That gives an infected immigrant roughly 3 weeks to illegally enter the country and spread Ebola via body fluids. Fortunately, hospital staff in the United States have been trained due to the international panic from the 2014 Sierra Leone outbreak.
At present, the risk to our nation directly is extremely low just because of where this is. That may change if we get outbreaks if it spreads into Goma or into Kinshasa or into Kampala or something like that if this sort of dwells on. But we do have a very effective screening program now that we've developed in a sense as a consequence of that 2014 experience. So I do think we're very prepared here. This is why I come back and say, and I'll say to you in general for our health security, the best thing this nation can do to protect its health security is to detect, respond, and prevent these outbreaks where they start.
But why would we disregard national security to a degree that puts us all at risk? Is it simply to satisfy the Democrats' fantasy that there is no crisis on the border?
Last month alone, we saw 144,000 people come into our country illegally. It is overwhelming our system, and President Trump made it clear that Mexico must do more. Yesterday, the President directed us, myself, the Secretary of State, and our team to meet with the Mexican delegation at their request and hear them out. Progress was made. The Mexican delegation brought forward proposals, but as the President said last night, it was not nearly enough. And we made it clear yesterday at the White House that Mexico must do significantly more.
I think it's safe to say you've talked to all of our members. We're not fans of tariffs. We're still hoping that this can be avoided. At the same time, it's way past time the President's requests for assistance from our government be met. I mean, we walked out of here after we did this supplemental, and the Democrats insisted on taking out of the supplemental they just passed in the House yesterday anything to address the humanitarian crisis at the border that would be funded by Health and Human Services.
We all believe that immigration is the constant reinvigoration of America, enriching America with immigrants, enriching America with their hopes, their dreams, their aspirations. And again, it's really a happy day because are dreamers. They're the gold standard. They love America. They're patriotic.
How can the government claim they have an interest in national security and continue a position of open borders where millions of U.S. citizens could die from diseases crossing that border? John Bowne reporting. Recently, all it took for the Ebola virus to jump over the border between the Congo and Uganda in Africa was an infected group of 6 people crossing via a footpath. Since then, a 5-year-old boy on the Ugandan side died from the Ebola disease after vomiting up blood. Fox reported the stubbornness of Congolese is a challenge in screening. A Ugandan Red Cross official, Francis Tumwine, told the Associated Press at one border crossing last week, they have failed to understand that Ebola is there. They think that it is witchcraft which is killing them. Meanwhile, hundreds of Congolese refugees were dumped in San Antonio, Texas, and then bussed into the interior of the United States, disappearing into the population without travel documents and/or host homes.
Before, months ago, they still had to have travel documents, but the federal government stopped making that a kind of like a policy, right? And because they can still grant asylum to anyone, even if they don't have asylum. They don't have host homes. All of them, again, have received asylum from the federal government. Can't be clear enough about that.
Right.
So I know there's a lot of conspiracy out there about that, but that's true.
Right.
Like these are, even the Congolese have received, got asylum, right? What's frustrating about that, they did not get assigned host homes. I have no idea why they were not like that. You'd have to ask the federal government why they released migrants without host homes assigned, because that's usually not protocol.
U.S. border town seeks African dialect speakers as hundreds of Africans cross from Mexico. That's today. That's hundreds more today. Exactly what Border Patrol told me this morning. They said, yeah, Mr. Jones, we're really freaked out. Do you know why Fox News won't cover this? Do you know why the president isn't talking about the Ebola threat? Because we'll be honest with you, just like years ago, we just go down the line, and nothing against you, but, it'd be bigger if Fox did this. And I go, I understand. They go, but we know that you'll get it out, and maybe Matt Drudge will get it out. A normal news editor at a major paper would spend days just on this topic. This is so huge. This is like giant kahuna level insane. I live here. I have 4 children here. We're already seeing drug-resistant whooping cough and TB. It's everywhere. People are dying that I know.
Of course, the Mockingbird media quickly grabbed the master narrative and spread their propaganda to local stations across the country, claiming independent media was misleading. Get a load of how National Newsboy arrogantly uses the same sources yet comes to a different, misleading conclusion.
That is the direct headline being shared on social media right now. It's a case of 2 facts being put together in a misleading way. Here's how we know, starting with our sources. The City of San Antonio, Customs and Border Protection, the World Health Organization, and my colleagues at Ken's in San Antonio. Now, it is true that Congolese refugees come from a country with an Ebola outbreak. That's the second fact here. But if you stop there, you miss important context. The CBP confirmed to verify that they monitor all immigrants to the country and have tests to identify cases of Ebola. They have had no encounters of Ebola along the southwest border. Bottom line, headlines like this are misleading. While Congo is having an Ebola outbreak, immigrants from the country are tested, and there's no evidence that they are carrying any dangerous virus into the U.S.
Yet the article never claims that they are carrying the Ebola virus, Captain Verify. The article is simply concerned that an outbreak of this potential magnitude isn't a top priority. Oh, that's right, we aren't allowed to ask relevant questions, I forgot. Where were these monitors in 2014? During the 2014 to 2016 Ebola outbreak in the United States, where 11 people were treated, including an Ebola-infected 45-year-old man who, according to the CDC, was treated for possible sinusitis and discharged. 3 days later, the man returned to the hospital by ambulance with a persistent fever, abdominal pain, and new onset diarrhea. 2 days later, the Texas Department of State Health Services and the CDC confirmed that patient 1 was positive for the Ebola virus. 8 days later, he was dead. He had also infected a Dallas, Texas nurse.
A second nurse in Dallas has tested positive for Ebola. Amber Vinson is, for now, in stable condition, but her case is raising serious concerns that measures they're using to contain Ebola are not measuring up.
That was one man who sought treatment. Of course, we are told we have nothing to worry about.
Yeah, so they don't have Ebola. Ebola would be transferred within 21 days, right? These migrants have been traveling. The ones if you're talking about from the Congo would have gotten Ebola months ago through their travels. So Ebola is not really a concern.
Do you feel totally confident that there is no threat of disease at this facility?
I feel totally confident that there is no threat of Ebola at this facility. We are told that they're doing background checks and that they're doing medical screenings, and then they're being given paperwork to appear in the ICE or asylum-seeking court.
What percentage of the people show up for the asylum hearing?
So it depends on the demographic, the court, but we do see too many cases where people are not showing up. We did an expedited pilot with family units this year with ICE and the immigration courts. Out of those 7,000 cases, 90 received final orders of removal in absentia, 90%.
90% did not show up?
Correct.
Okay.
I am totally confident that there is no risk of Ebola here in the city of San Antonio.
Have you checked all the medical records of everybody that comes through this facility?
No, but because Ebola has an incubation period of 21 days, and these folks have been traveling for 6 and 7 months.
I think you as a doctor know that that's not a good excuse, though, because you know disease can travel with people.
So are you asking me questions?
Yes.
I've answered your questions. Is there any other question I can answer?
In a study that's cited in the National Library of Medicine, a study was published by The Lancet Medical Journal. That study found that nearly 100% of the people that they studied from Africa had antibodies for Ebola. What does that mean? It means that, according to mainstream science, that almost 100% of those people were exposed to Ebola, but it didn't kill them. In fact, they showed no symptoms. And what can happen, even after you build antibodies, there can be viral fragments or viable viruses that continue to persist throughout your body. And they can exist in body fluids, such as mucus or semen or blood, of course, or other body fluids. And this is how many viral diseases spread, including Ebola. But what happens when you have essentially dormant Ebola that's in a person's body, showing no symptoms? And the science has also shown that some of those people will not test positive for Ebola right away. They can have Ebola for a period of time, in other words, and show no symptoms, and not even test positive for Ebola if there's a medical test given. If those individuals arrive in the United States, and then they begin to, for example, in whatever way you might imagine, share body fluids with the American people who may not be from Africa and may be more susceptible to these infections, you could theoretically get dormant Ebola from a carrier who has no symptoms suddenly transforming into active Ebola in someone who has no immunity.
But all it takes is a tiny bit of common sense to realize that an Ebola outbreak could happen at any moment, as there are hundreds of Congolese refugees starting their journey north from as far south as Brazil and Ecuador. All it would take is one to infect hundreds of immigrants that are migrating north by the thousands.
Well, what if it continued to spread? What if it starts spreading outside of a hospital environment? What if it spreads in a migrant processing center? What if it spreads on the streets of San Francisco, the streets of Los Angeles, that are already filthy places with almost no real hygiene going on, and they're being abandoned, the homeless people are being abandoned there by, the Democrats in charge of those cities. If you get Ebola mixed in with those kinds of environments, you probably cannot stop it without extreme medical police state measures.
And even though every source in this report is 100% verifiable, you've been told by your minders that this is fake news. Or is it? Jon Bowne reporting. You can always find us at dailynewscollective.com, at blablahshow.com, on YouTube at JonBownePolitix, on gab.ai at JonBownePolitix, and Twitter at NewsBound.